Hello, I'm Dr. Eric Edu, and I want to take you through the endocrine system. We want to concentrate on the histological aspect of most of the glands that constitute this system. So, hormone can be delivered either by the blood through the endocrine system, where hormones are released into the blood, and then it is set to target organs or structures. Or it can also be paracrine, where information that is released by one cell has effect on neighboring cells. And this usually occurs during wound healing and then embryogenesis, where some signals modulate the structure, shape, and function of other cells and tissues. Then you also have neuroendocrine, where the information is produced by a neuron and then eventually sent into the blood for circulation. So we'll look at this when we are looking at the magnocellular system and then the parvicellular system, especially the parvicellular system. We'll also concentrate on that. Then you can have neuron to neuron, okay? And this occurs a lot in the ascending and descending pathways where you have first order neuron, second order neuron, third order neurons, okay? So carrying a stimuli carrying, let's say, proprioception will pass through the first order neurons, okay, in the dorsal column pathway all the way to the medulla, where it will synapse with the second order neuron, which will go to thalamus, then third order neuron to the cerebral hemisphere, that is the somatosensory cortex. And then descending ones to like the corticospinal tract will also bring the information all the way to the spinal cord level. And then the second order neuron, which are usually motor, will also receive. So there's always a synapse, okay? So basically, we want to consider the pituitary gland. Obviously, the hypothalamus will also have some effect because of the regulatory hormones it releases. So pituitary gland, and then we look at adrenal glands, thyroid gland, basically. So these are the major areas we'll be touching on. So you have, especially in the pituitary, the adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle-stimulating hormone, growth hormones, luteinizing hormone, melanocyte-stimulating hormone, prolactin, thyroid-stimulating hormone. And then we look at the posterior aspect, the posterior pituitary, with these two peptide hormones, the antidiuretic hormone, ADH, and then oxytocin. Okay. This is also known as the vasopressin, the antidiuretic hormone. So note that the pituitary has an anterior portion and a posterior portion, which develop differently embryologically. And also, more importantly, the components here in the anterior pituitary, we want to look at which of them will stain basophilic and which of them will stain eosinophilic. So that will tell you that you have acidophiles and then basophiles, okay? Look at that. So this is a picture of the pituitary gland. That is the hypothalamus. That is the median eminence. And that is the infundibulum or the infundibulum stem. Okay. And then it leads to this bulging component. That is the pars nervosa. Okay. Then you also have wrapped around the infundibulum a portion of the anterior pituitary known as the pars tuberalis. And then there's an intermediate portion that is spanning between the anterior pituitary's pars distalis and then that of the pars nervosa, which is known as the pars intermedia. it is important to know that in humans, this is not of great significance, and it doesn't, show itself much like other non-human, animals. So let's go over that again. Anterior pituitary is made up of the pars tuberalis, which goes around the infundibulum stem. They have the pars intermedia, and they have pars distalis. That is the hypophysia fossa within the bone known as the sphenoid, okay, and in specific location of the sella tessica that this pituitary, is housed. So during the development, you have the neuroectoderm contributing to the posterior pituitary, and then the oral ectoderm in red contributing to the anterior pituitary. All right. That's why I have the blue and red. This has been covered in one of my videos. So you can look at that for more details. So that again is the posterior portion, and it is in continuation with the rest of the brain, i.e. hypothalamus. Okay, that is the mammillary body, and that is the optic chiasma or chiasm. And it is important to use this as landmarks to note which orientation you are looking at as far as the pituitary is concerned. So because the optic chiasm is related to the eye, and the eye is related to the front or anterior part of the face or the head, this region is obviously going to be the anterior pituitary. And then this mammillary body is posterior to the optic chiasma, and therefore towards the posterior portion. So this is posterior pituitary. So when you look at this diagram, you also see that the adenohypophysis, which is the anterior pituitary, is rather facing the right side. The posterior pituitary is facing the left side. That is why I was using the optic chiasma and then the mammillary body as what? References, so that you know which orientation you are looking at. That's the pars distalis, that's pars tuberalis. Then for the neurohypophysis, you have the pars nervosa there, you have the infundibulum, the stem, that's the median eminence. Then here we have the pars intermedia there. Then also note that you have the supraoptic nucleus here, and then paraventricular nuclei. They will be in the magnocellular system, as you will see very soon. That's the way they transport their hormones. So the pituitary has effect on all these glands: thyroid gland, the mammary gland, the testes, the adrenal gland, adipocytes, muscles, ovary, melanocytes, the stimulating hormones. So sometimes we describe it as the master gland. If it works normally, everything will be fine. If not, in childhood, if there is a pituitary tumor, it will cause gigantism. As you can see, this person is taller than others standing by. Then if it occurs in an adult or in adulthood, you are going to have acromegaly with some disfigured, or disproportionate facial architecture. So the jaws, the chin, you can see that they are more prominent. Now, this is where our interest lies. So you look at it and you realize that in this, micrograph, you can clearly see two spherical masses. This is one, and this is another one. Okay, this is more or less halved. It's not too spherical as this one. So in essence, if the title is not there, you should be able to tell automatically that you are looking at the pituitary gland. Then you get to differentiate between the two parts, because obviously you can see that one part stains darker or deeper than the other one. This is lighter than that. So you can see that they are eosinophilic, okay, or they are acidophiles, but this is more eosinophilic than the other, okay, and we'll see why. Then you can also see the intermediate portion there with the remnant of the Radke's pouch, okay, there as white. So when we take a section of what we just looked at, you clearly see anterior pituitary is more eosinophilic than the posterior pituitary because of the cell that occupy the anterior pituitary. And surprisingly, it's not only acidophiles that you find in the anterior pituitary, you also find basophiles. So they are both eosinophilic and then basophilic stain. However, you have more of the eosinophilic stain. So that is what's masking the effect of the basophilic stain. But here in the posterior, remember this in connection with the brain, so it is made up of neurons, and neurons do not make much stain. Okay, that is why it is lighter. Then that is the pars intermedia. See that. And it is also of importance to note that the pars intermedia is poorly developed in humans. Okay, it doesn't show that much compared to other non-human animals you see in terms of the slides. So this also is depicting that's anterior, that is posterior. So that is the infundibulum stem, that is a portion of the pars tuberalis. You can see the Radke's pouch remnants as hollow structures, and that is pars intermedia. So here too, you can see PD stands for pars distalis, which is the anterior pituitary, then pars intermedia PI, PT is pars tuberalis, and then IS is the infundibulum stalk or stem, infundibulum stem, then that is the pars nervosa. So like I said earlier on, the anterior pituitary contains both eosinophilic and basophilic cells. So let's try and distinguish between them. So the somatotropic cell or the growth hormone, the cell that releases that is acidophilic, so it will be more eosinophilia. Then the mammotropic cell that releases prolactin also is acidophilic. However, the gonadotropic cells are basophilic, and thyrotropic cells are also basophilic, as well as corticotropic cells. So you should note that. All right. When you look at this micrograph, which is at a very high power, you can see the basophils. One is here looking purple, or yes, there's purple, and then this is also looking purple, but even darker. Then the acidophile is looking more pinkish or reddish, and these are all acidophiles. Okay, you can see them there. Then obviously you have basophiles there as well. Then these ones are actually sinusoid containing red blood cells. Another sinusoid here with red blood cell. That's another one there. So there are two main pathways, okay, by which the pituitary regulates glands. So it's either by the parvicellular system or the magnocellular system. So the parvicellular system, the neurons produce and secrete hormones that arrive at the anterior pituitary. So its destination is the anterior pituitary. While the magnocellular system, the destination is the posterior pituitary. So the parvicellular system, whose destination is the anterior pituitary, secretes into a blood vessel, okay, the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal vessels, before they reach the anterior pituitary. Unlike the magnocellular system, where the neurons produce and secrete hormones directly into the posterior pituitary along their axons, okay, so they don't interchange it with the blood vessel for the blood vessel to send it to the destination. The axons of those nuclei will actually send them directly there. But eventually, when they send them to the posterior pituitary, the hormone will end up in capillaries and then will be sent into circulation. Okay. So this is what we are talking about. So for the parvicellular system, these neurons, okay, located in the hypothalamus will bring their, product and then give it to the blood in red, and then blood will bring it to the destination at the anterior pituitary. But in magnocellular system, you see that the axons are directly into the posterior pituitary. Okay, so that is what occurs. So these are the ends of the axon. So we have the synaptic buttons there. Now, here in the anterior pituitary, we know that you have acidophiles and basophiles. Okay, so we mentioned that earlier on. So the same thing is occurring here. So that is magnocellular in green. So those are the nuclei, supraoptic and paraventricular, come all the way to the posterior pituitary and then now integrate it with the blood vessels. Okay, but in this parvicellular system, the nuclei will release and then the substance is carried along the axon. Then it is given to the blood vessel before the blood vessel brings it to the anterior pituitary, right? So the neurohypophysis of posterior pituitary consists of the posterior lobe with the pars nervosa and then the infundibulum stem or infundibular stem, as well as the median eminence. The posterior pituitary produces two peptide hormones, okay, by the supraoptic and paraventricular neurons, which is the magnocellular system in the hypothalamus, and pass to the posterior pituitary in non-myelinated axons. And these are released into capillaries and then into the body. So these are the two hormones produced by the posterior pituitary, the antidiuretic hormone or ADH, vasopressin antidiuretic hormone. This increases water permeability of the kidney collecting tube. So water is retained rather than being lost, which is diuresis. Then oxytocin promotes smooth muscle contraction in uterus during patrician and the myoepithelial cells of lactating mothers. Okay. Also, the posterior pituitary contains pituitary-cytes. Okay, so these are cells located in the posterior pituitary, contain pituitary-cytes and axonal processes of the unmyelinated nerve fibers. Remember, this is coming from the hypothalamus, the supraoptic, and then paraventricular nuclei, whose cell bodies are located in the paraventricular and supraoptic nuclei of the hypothalamus. The axonal processes of these nerve fibers form a tract known as the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. There are also herring bodies and neurophysin in the posterior lobe, as we are looking at in terms of the posterior pituitary. The terminal portions of the axonal processes are expanded and contain numerous secretory granules known as the herring bodies. The two peptide hormones in the posterior pituitary, that is the vasopressin and oxytocin, are bound to a carrier protein called neurophysin. So note that as well. So that's what we have described: magnocellular, the axon, cell bodies, the hypothalamus, then the axons and nerve terminals here, oxytocin, vasopressin. So similar diagram depicting what we have described. So this is a special stain of the pituitary. It's not human, okay? This is a non-human. And therefore, the intermediate portion is quite large and prominent. So that's the anterior pituitary, then that's the posterior, then intermediate, then Rothschild pouch, the remnant. Okay, remember, this is a special thing, it's not the normal H and E. Thank you very much, and I hope this video helps. We will look at the adrenal gland and then thyroid gland in another lecture.